George Pickens attended Hoover High School in Alabama, where he dominated his way up the rankings with 72 receptions, over 1,300 yards, and 15 touchdowns. And that was just his senior season. His talent and his presence was now wanted everywhere.
Thanks for all the schools that recruited me, and I'll be attending the University of Georgia.
On February 6, 2019, George Pickens decommitted from Auburn and signed a letter of intent with the Georgia Bulldogs as a 6'3", four-star recruit. Immediately, George Pickens' presence was felt at the University of Georgia. As a true freshman, George Pickens came up on the scene ready to destroy the rankings, hauling in 49 receptions for 727 yards and 8 touchdowns. During his sophomore year, he was once again unbelievable, tallying up 36 catches, 513 yards, 6 touchdowns in just 8 games before his whole world came crashing down.
Switching gears to college football, one of the University of Georgia's star football players is out for the 2021 season. George Pickens, a junior wide receiver, injured his right knee in spring football practice on a non-contact play on Tuesday afternoon.
On March 24, 2021, George Pickens tore his ACL in practice and was set to miss the rest of the season. But a year later, he went on to play a massive role in Georgia's college football playoff run. And soon after, on January 14th, 2022, George Pickens declared for the NFL draft in hopes to completely change his life. And as the draft went on, wide receivers just kept coming off the board, and none of them were George Pickens. In fact, 9 wide receivers were drafted before him, until finally, in 2 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers, George Pickens has tallied up over 115 catches, 1,900 yards, and 9 touchdowns in the NFL, but has already proven himself to be one of the most up-and-coming wide receivers in the league. But who are the wide receivers taken before George Pickens, and where are they now? In this video, we'll be breaking down every wide receiver drafted before him and how their career has turned out so far. However, before we dive into that, do me a massive favor, hit the like button if you're enjoying the video so far, but more importantly, subscribe to the channel if you're new. It is free, it doesn't cost anything, and we're going to be covering the NFL and the Pittsburgh Steelers throughout the entirety of not only the offseason, but the preseason, training camp, regular season, everything. We got you guys covered. Join the family and comment down below. Do you think anyone regrets passing up on George Pickens? Let's get into the video. With the 8th pick of the NFL draft, the Atlanta Falcons selected wide receiver Drake London out of USC. The big 6'4", 213-pound red zone threat who can also just go up and make big time catches at any moment in time. This was a guy who is highly regarded coming out of USC, but so far in his career hasn't been as good as George Pickens, at least in my opinion. Has rallied up over 141 catches, 1,700 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 2 seasons, averaging 12.6 yards per reception. Now, Drake London isn't a bad receiver, but in my opinion, I would take George Pickens. With the 10th overall pick in the first round, Garrett Wilson was selected to the New York Jets. And all things considered, Garrett Wilson has been really good so far in his career in terms of getting open, getting big time grabs, being an extreme playmaker after the catch, having over 2,100 yards on 178 catches and 7 touchdowns as well. Garrett Wilson has been everything as advertised and a little bit more as well, right? Then you also throw into account that he's had Zach Wilson throwing him the football. With the full season with Aaron Rodgers, I think Garrett Wilson could turn into maybe one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. So with that being said, Garrett Wilson is on a good trajectory in the right direction, and he really is a good wide receiver, well deserved, going number 10 overall. And then there was Chris Olave. With the 11th pick overall in the draft, the New Orleans Saints decided, let's go grab another wide receiver in Chris Olave to pair up with Michael Thomas. And today, they've actually let go of Michael Thomas because of how good Chris Olave has been, and he's taken over the team as the alpha wide receiver in just 2 seasons, tallying up over 159 catches, 2,100 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Another really good grab here for the Saints, and someone they think could be a dog in the NFL for a very long time. But still, nobody's even came close to George Pickens in terms of yards per reception, and I believe if he had a good quarterback in terms of George Pickens, I think he would be untouchable, at least so far. And with the 12th overall selection in the first round, the Detroit Lions have decided to take Jameson Williams, a wide receiver out of Alabama who has pure speed under his resume, a guy who can get behind the defense and make big-time plays happen. However, his career hasn't started off the way he'd hoped it would. Obviously, being suspended for the first part of his career with some gambling issues, he was reinstated and, made a little bit of a comeback, not really doing too much in his first season, just playing in 6 games, grabbing 1 catch for 41 yards and a touchdown. But then the injury bugs start happening. Obviously injured in Alabama, tore his ACL during the national championship game versus Georgia, suffered a hamstring strain, a grade 2 hamstring strain during training camp in 2023, and then missed some time there. Did end up getting hurt in week 17 of the NFL last season as well, and has barely been able to stay on the field. But when it comes to his production, 25 catches, 395 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 15.8 yards per reception. A guy who can really, really make big-time plays happen. But can he stay healthy? If you ask me, man, George Pickens would have been a great pick here. Next up, we have Jahan Dotson, a guy who was drafted number 16 overall to the Washington Commanders, who was looked at to be the number 2 wide receiver behind Terry McLaurin. And that's pretty much come to fruition. He's been nothing more than just a really, really good number 2 option, right? Having over 84 catches, over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, about 12.4 yards per reception as well. They really love Jahan Dotson over here in Washington and kind of expect him to break out in year 3. So obviously, the full verdict is not out on Dotson just yet. But again, the future could be really bright for him as a red zone threat, a guy who can just make a lot of big plays happen. Obviously, the verdict's not out for a lot of these guys, but again, if you ask me, George Pickens so far, with the quarterback that he's been playing with, man, he looks like one of the top-end wide receivers, again, at least so far. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit dicey. With the 18th pick of the first round, the Tennessee Titans, losing A.J. Brown to a trade to the Philadelphia Eagles, decided to re-up and take what they thought would be the next A.J. Brown, the 6'2 wide receiver out of Arkansas, Treylon Burks here, who, quite frankly, has not done much throughout his career so far. And again, the verdict is not yet out, but he has a lot of work to do going forward in order to not only stay healthy, but kind of make the Tennessee Titans roster. Fast forward to 2024, the man is behind DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, and is now kind of on the trade block, right? Someone that they don't really believe in anymore. They have a new front office, they have a new coach, and he could be out the door. A guy who's tallied up about 49 catches for 665 yards and just 1 lone touchdown throughout his career so far. Treylon Burks, I'm not saying he's a bust, but so far, George Pickens, wow. With the 2nd pick of the 2nd round of the NFL draft, the Green Bay Packers decided to select Christian Watson out of North Dakota State, a 6'4", 208-pound wide receiver who they thought could be their future alpha wide receiver. However, has not been as advertised, at least so far. However, what I will say, this dude is a big-time wide receiver weapon in the red zone and a guy who can get a ton of touchdowns. The one knock on him has been the injuries. And when you look at the injuries, there's been a lot, right? His first season in the NFL, he had an issue that popped up, had to go through surgery, and was then cleared. to go for the start of the season. But he missed the game, re-aggravated a thigh hamstring, missed week 6 and 7, and then week 8 came back, had a concussion, missed the rest of that game. Then in August of 2023, another hamstring strain, was out the first 3 weeks of the season, made his first appearance in week 4, and then in week 7 sustained a right knee injury. He didn't miss any extra time, but then on December 3rd had another thigh hamstring injury, and then missed the remainder of 2023. So obviously the big thing with Christian Watson is, can he stay healthy? And if he can stay healthy, this is a guy who is going to be a big time red zone threat. And honestly, he's not a bust at all. If he can stay healthy, I really do like him as a player. And with the 43rd pick of the second round, the New York Giants decided to take Wan'Dale Robinson out of Kentucky, the 5'8", 185-pound slot receiver. They thought he was going to be a big-time weapon for them as well. And quite honestly, hasn't been great. Has been okay, but still has a lot of room to grow. And again, if they were looking for a slot receiver, then, maybe George Pickens wasn't the guy they could have went for. But man, just imagine what they could have had right now if they had Malik Neighbors, George Pickens, and Jalen Hyatt. That would be one of the scariest wide receiver trios in all of football. But throughout his career so far, Wan'Dale Robinson has 83 catches for about 752 yards to just 2 touchdowns. A very good intermediate short route runner, a guy who can get open underneath and maybe make plays happen down the field. But again, if you ask me, I'm still taking George Pickens every single day of the week. For the 44th pick of the second round, John Mechie's career has been an uphill battle and an ultimate dog, a guy who you just want to root for, a guy who's only played 1 season so far, but has beat leukemia, has went through it all, has went through hell and back, and like I said before, a guy you just want on your football team because he's willing to do anything to get, where he has been, right? So I love John Mechie, even though he hasn't been, extremely productive on the football field. You got to look at him and just be in awe with what he has done so far. In 2023, basically his rookie season, has 16 catches, 158 yards, 0 touchdowns, but a guy they think can develop into something nice. Now, he's also been in another uphill battle of just the guys in front of him have been really, really good, right? Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and now Stephon Diggs. It's going to continue to be an uphill battle for him to get on the field, but when he does, I think he can be really, really productive. We'll see what happens next season, but again, I like John Mechie. Not that he's a bust. I don't think he's a bust at all. We'll see what happens going forward. But again, George Pickens, man. Imagine if they had him. And last but not least, Tyquan Thornton, the 50th overall pick of the 2022 NFL Draft. The last receiver drafted before George Pickens is now a cut candidate, playing behind guys like Jalen Polk, Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, KJ Osborne, Javon Baker, Jalen Reagor, Kayshon Boutte, Juju Smith-Schuster, and is now the number 9 wide receiver on his team. Currently has an uphill battle and a long way to go to make this New England Patriots team for the 2024 season. A guy who has tallied up 35 catches for 338 yards and just 2 touchdowns, declining from year 1 to year 2. Things are not looking great for Tyquan Thornton. And then again, we look at it and say, just imagine if they had George Pickens. George Pickens was then drafted 2 picks later with the number 52 overall draft selection. And now that the Pittsburgh Steelers have added guys like Russell Wilson and Justin Fields and moved on from Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph, I think George Pickens is about to be the next big-time wide receiver in the NFL. And if you ask me, there are maybe 1 or 2 wide receivers that have been better so far, but still, 9 taken before George Pickens is quite honestly disrespectful. George Pickens is on his way up, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he ends up being the best wide receiver in this draft class. Let me know in the comments down below, who do you think George Pickens should have been drafted before? And do you think there is any wide receivers that you would still take over George Pickens to this day? Hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, join the family, and I'll see you guys in the next update. And if you guys want me to do another video like this, comment down below what player you want me to do. And I'll see you in the next one.